Hi friends, Miss Ventries here, and I'm going to continue reading to you guys our read aloud, the BFG by Roald Dahl. And today we are going to read chapters 6 and 7. All right, because chapter 6 is kind of short. But while I'm reading today, I want you guys to be paying attention to the way that the BFG speaks. It's kind of in a mixed up way. He uses words that aren't real words, but you can figure out the word that he's trying to use based on all of the clues around that word. So remember, we call that using context clues when you try to figure out a word that you don't know by reading all the words in the sentence and maybe even the sentence before. Sometimes you have to keep reading on to the next sentence for more clues to figure out what that new word might mean. So that's what you guys are going to do today after we listen to chapter 6 as well as chapter 7. And don't forget, you have the book up in our Google Classroom, so you'll have to go back and reread parts of those chapters today. Okay? So chapter 1 is called The Giants. Chapter 6 is called The Giants. "But if you are so nice and friendly," Sophie said, "then why did you snatch me from my bed and run away with me?" "Because you saw me," the big friendly giant answered. "If anyone is ever seeing a giant, he or she must be taken away hip switch." "Why?" asked Sophie. "Well, first of all," said the BFG, "human beings is not really believing in giants, is they? Human beings is not thinking we exist." "I do," Sophie said. "Ah, but that is only because you have seen me," cried the BFG. "I cannot possibly allow anyone, even little girls, to be seeing me and staying at home. The first thing you would be doing, you would be scuttling around, yodeling the news that you were actually seeing a giant, and then a great giant hunt, a mighty giant look-see, would be starting up all over the world, with the human beings all rummaging for the great giant you saw and getting wildly excited. People would be coming rushing and bushing after me with goodness knows what, and they would be catching me and locking me into a cage to be stared at. They would be putting me into the zoo or the bunkum house with all those squiggling hippo dumplings and crocodile dillies." Sophie knew that what the giant said was true. If any person reported actually having seen a giant haunting the streets of a town at night, there would most certainly be a terrific hullabaloo all across the world. "I will bet you," the BFG went on, "that you would have been splashed in the news all over the wonky world, wouldn't you, if I hadn't wiggled you away?" "I suppose I would," said Sophie. "And that would never do," said the BFG. "So what will happen to me now?" Sophie asked. "If you do go back, you will be telling the world," said the BFG. "Most likely on the telly bunkum box and the radio squeaker. So you will just have to be staying here with me for the rest of your life." "Oh no!" cried Sophie. "Oh yes," said the BFG. "But I am warning you not to ever go whiffling about out of this cave without Ayah's with you, or you will be coming to an mucky end. I is showing you now who is going to eat you up, if they is ever catching even one tiny little glimpse of you." The big friendly giant picked Sophie off the table and carried her to the cave entrance. He rolled a huge stone to one side and said, "Peep out over there, little girl, and tell me what you was saying." Sophie, sitting on the BFG's hand, peeped out of the cave. The sun was up now and shining fiery hot over the great yellow wasteland with its blue rocks and dead trees. "Is you seeing them?" the BFG asked. Sophie, squinting through the glare of the sun, saw several tremendous tall figures moving among the rocks. There's a great sketch that I want you guys to see of what Sophie saw when she peered out of the cave. About 500 yards away, 3 or 4 others were sitting quite motionless on the rocks themselves. "This is giant country," the BFG said. "Those is all giants, every one. It was a brain-boggling sight. The giants were all naked except for a short skirt around their waists, and their skins were burnt brown by the sun. But it was the sheer size of each one of them that boggled Sophie's brain most of all. They were simply colossal, far taller and wider than the big friendly giant, upon whose hand she was now sitting. And oh, how ugly they were! Many of them had large bellies. All of them had long arms and big feet. They were too far away for their faces to be seen clearly, and perhaps that was a good thing. "What on earth are they doing?" Sophie asked. "Nothing," said the BFG. "They is just moochling and foochling around and waiting for the night to come. Then they will be all galloping off to places where people is living to find their suppers." "You mean to Turkey?" said Sophie. "Bone crunching giant will be galloping to Turkey, of course," said the BFG. "But the others will be whiffling off to all sorts of flung-away places like Wellington for the booty flavor and Panama for the hatty taste. Every giant is having his own favorite hunting ground." "Do they ever go to England?" Sophie asked. "Often," said the BFG. "They say the English is tasting ever so wonderfully of cod scallop." "I'm not sure I quite know what that means," Sophie said. "Meanings is not important," said the BFG. "I cannot be right all the time. Quite often I is left instead of right." "And are all those beastly giants over there really going off again tonight to eat people?" Sophie asked. "All of them is guzzling human beings every night," the BFG answered. "All of them excepting me. That is why you will be coming to an ucky-mucky end if any of them should ever be getting his gogglers upon you. You would be swallowed up like a piece of frumpkin pie, all in one dollop." "But eating people is horrible," Sophie cried. "It's frightful. Why doesn't someone stop them?" "And who, please, is going to be stopping them?" asked the BFG. "Couldn't you?" said Sophie. "Pfft, never in a pig's whistle," cried the BFG. "All of those man-eating giants is enormous and very fierce. They is all at least 2 times my wideness and double my royal highness." I think he meant my height, or my royal height. Here's a good little sketch of those two chatting away again. I don't know about you guys, but it kind of seems like they might becoming friends. "Easily that," said the BFG. "You was seeing them in the distance, but just wait till you get them close up. Those giants is all at least 50 feet tall, with huge muscles. Alive-o. I is the titchy one. I is the runt. 24 feet is puddle nuts in giant country." "You mustn't feel bad about it," Sophie said. "I think you are just great." "Why, even your toes must be as big as sausages." "Bigger," said the BFG, looking pleased. "They is as big as bumplehammers." "How many giants are there out there?" Sophie asked. 9 altogether," answered the BFG. "That means," Sophie said, "that somewhere in the world, every single night, 9 wretched people get carried away and eaten alive." "More," said the BFG. "It's all depending, you see, on how big the human beings is. Japanese beans is very small, so a giant will need to gobble up about 6 until he's feeling full up. Others, like the Norway people on the Yankee Doodles, is ever so much bigger, and usually 2 or 3 of those makes a good tuck-in." "But do these disgusting giants go to every single country in the world?" Sophie asked. "All countries excepting Greece is getting visited sometime or another," the BFG answered. "The country which a giant visits is depending on how he is feeling. If it is very warm weather and a giant is feeling as hot as a sizzle pan, he will probably go galloping far up to the Frisbee North to get himself an Eskimo or 2 to cool him down. A nice fat Eskimo to a giant is like a lovely ice cream lolly to you." "I'll take your word for it," Sophie said. "And then again, if it is a frosty night and the giant is fridging with cold, he will probably point his nose towards the sweltering hotlands to guzzle a few Hottentots to warm him up." "How perfectly horrible," Sophie said. "Nothing hots a cold giant up like a hot Hottentot, the BFG said. And if you were to put me down on the ground, and I was to walk out among them now, Sophie said, would they really eat me up? Like a whiffswittle, cried the BFG. And what is more, you is so small they wouldn't even have to chew you. The first one to be seeing you would pick you up in his fingers and down you go like a drop of drain water. Let's go back inside, Sophie said. I hate even watching them. Chapter 7. The Marvelous Ears. Back in the cave, the big friendly giant sat Sophie down once again on the enormous table. Is you quite snugly there in your nightgown, he asked. You isn't frigid cold. I'm fine, Sophie said. I cannot help thinking, said the BFG, about your poor mother and father. By now they must be jipping and scumping all over the house shouting, hello, hello, where's Sophie gone? I don't have a mother and father, Sophie said. They both died when I was a baby. Oh, you poor little scrumplet, cried the BFG. Is you not missing them very badly? Not really, Sophie said, because I never knew them. You was making me sad, the BFG said, rubbing his eyes. Don't be sad, Sophie said. No one is going to be worrying too much about me. That place you took me from was the village orphanage. We're all orphans in there. You is an orphan? Yes. How many is in there? 10 of us, Sophie said. All little girls. Was you happy there? The BFG asked. I hated it, Sophie said. The woman who ran it was called Mrs. Clonkers, and if she caught you breaking any of the rules, like getting out of bed at night or not folding up your clothes, you got punished. How's you getting punished? She locked us in the dark cellar for a day and a night without anything to eat or drink. The rotten old rot rasper, cried the BFG. It was horrid, Sophie said. We used to dread it. There were rats down there. We could hear them creeping about. The filthy old fizzwiggler, shouted the BFG. That is the horridest thing I is hearing for years. You was making me sadder than ever. All at once, a huge tear that would have filled a bucket rolled down one of the BFG's cheeks and fell with a splash on the floor. It made quite a puddle. So some really good clues in this paragraph about maybe a certain character trait we could say is true about the BFG based on the way that he's having compassion for Sophie and her situation. Sophie watched with astonishment. What a strange and moody creature this is, she thought. One moment he is telling me my head is full of squash flies, and the next moment his heart is melting for me because Mrs. Clonkers locks us in the cellar. The thing that worries me, Sophie said, is having to stay in this dreadful place for the rest of my life. The orphanage was pretty awful, but I wouldn't have been there forever, would I? All is my fault, the BFG said. I is the one who kid-snatched you. Yet another enormous tear welled from his eye and splashed on the floor. Now I come to think of it, I won't actually be here all that long, Sophie said. I is afraid you will, the BFG said. No, I won't, Sophie said. Those brutes out there are bound to catch me sooner or later and have me for tea. I is never letting that happen, the BFG said. For a few moments in the cave was silent. Then Sophie said, May I ask you a question? The BFG wiped the tears from his eyes with the back of his hand and gave Sophie a long, thoughtful stare. Shoot away, he said. Would you please tell me what you were doing in our village last night? Why were you poking that long trumpet thing into the Gucci children's bedroom and then blowing through it? Aha! Cried the BFG, sitting up suddenly in his chair. Now he is getting nosier than a Parker. And the suitcase you were carrying, Sophie said, what on earth was that all about? The BFG stared suspiciously at the small girl sitting cross-legged on the table. You was asking me to tell you whoopsie big secrets, he said. Secrets that nobody is ever hearing before. I won't tell a soul, Sophie said. I swear it. How could I anyway? I am stuck here for the rest of my life. You could be telling the other giants. No, I couldn't, Sophie said. You told me they would eat me up the moment they saw me. And so they would, said the BFG. You was a human being, and human beings is like straw bunkles and cream to those giants. If they are going to eat me the moment they see me, Then I wouldn't have time to tell them anything, would I? Sophie said. You wouldn't, said the BFG. And why did you say I might? Because I is brimful of buzzburgers, the BFG said. If you listen to everything I'm saying, you will be getting an earache. Please tell me what you were doing in our village, Sophie said. I promise you can trust me. Would you teach me how to make an elephant? The BFG said. What do you mean? Sophie said. I would dearly love to have an elephant to ride on. The BFG said dreamily, I would so much love to have a jumbly big elephant and go riding through green forests, picking peachy fruits off the trees all day long. This is a sizzling hot, muck-frumping country we is living in. Nothing grows in it except snozcumbers. I would love to go somewhere else and pick peachy fruits in the early morning from the back of an elephant. Sophie was quite moved by this curious statement. Perhaps one day we will get you an elephant, she said, and peachy fruits as well. Now tell me, what were you doing in our village? If you was really wanting to know what I am doing in your village, the BFG said, I is blowing a dream into the bedroom of those children. Blowing a dream? Sophie said. What do you mean? I is a dream-blowing giant, the BFG said. When all the other giants is galloping off every what way and which to swallow human beings, I is scuttling away to other places to blow dreams into the bedrooms of sleeping children. Nice dreams, lovely golden dreams, dreams that is giving the dreamers a happy time. Now hang on a minute, Sophie said. Where do you get these dreams? I collect them, the BFG said, waving an arm towards all the rows and rows of bottles on the shelves. I has billions of them. You can't collect a dream, Sophie said. A dream isn't something you can catch hold of. You is never going to understand about it, the BFG said. That is why I is not wishing to tell you. Oh, please tell me, Sophie said. I will understand. Go on. Tell me how you collect dreams. Tell me everything. The BFG settled himself comfortably in his chair and crossed his legs. Dreams, he said, is very mysterious things. They is floating around the air like wispy, misty bubbles, and all the time they is searching for sleeping people. Can you see them? Sophie asked. Never at first. Then how do you catch them if you can't see them? Sophie asked. Aha, said the BFG. Now we is getting on to the dark and dusky secrets. I won't tell a soul. I is trusting you, the BFG said. He closed his eyes and sat quite still for a moment while Sophie waited. A dream, he said, as it goes whiffling through the night air, is making a tiny little buzzing, humming noise. But this little buzzy hum is so silvery soft, it is impossible for a human being to be hearing it. Can you hear it? Sophie asked. The BFG pointed up at his enormous truck wheel ears, which he now began to move in and out. He performed this exercise proudly, with a little proud smile on his face. Is you seeing these? He asked. How could I miss them? Sophie said. You gotta see these. Pretty big. They may be as looking a bit preposterous to you, the BFG said. But you must believe me when I say they is very extra usual ears indeed. They is not to be coughed at. I'm quite sure they're not, Sophie said. They is allowing me to hear absolutely every single twiddly little thing. You mean you can hear things I can't hear? Sophie asked. You as deaf as a dumpling, compared with me, cried the BFG. You is hearing only thumping loud noises with those little earwigs of yours, but I am hearing all the secret whisperings of the world. Such as what? Sophie asked. In your country, he said, I is hearing the footsteps of a ladybird as she goes walking across a leaf. I think he means ladybug. Honestly, Sophie said, beginning to be impressed. What's more, I is hearing those footsteps very loud, the BFG said. When a ladybird is walking across a leaf, I is hearing her feet go clumpity clump clump, like giant's footsteps. Good gracious me, Sophie said. What else can you hear? I is hearing the little ants chittering to each other as they scuttle around in the soil. You mean you can hear ants talking? Every single word, the BFG said, although I was not exactly understanding their language. Go on, Sophie said. Sometimes on a very clear night, the BFG said, and if I is swiggling my ears in the right direction, and here he swiveled his great ears upwards so they were facing the ceiling. If I is swiggling them like this, and the night is very clear, I is sometimes hearing far away music coming from the stars in the sky. A strange little shiver passed through Sophie's body. She sat very quiet, waiting for more. My ears is what told me you was watching me out of your window last night, the BFG said. But I didn't make a sound, Sophie said. I was hearing your heart beating across the road, the BFG said, loud as a drum. Go on, Sophie said, please. I can hear plants and trees. Do they talk? Sophie asked. They is not exactly talking, the BFG said, but they is making noises. For instance, if I come along and I is picking a lovely flower, if I is twisting the stem of the flower till it breaks, then the plant is screaming. I can hear it screaming and screaming very clear. You don't mean it, Sophie said. How awful. It is screaming just like you would be screaming if someone was twisting your arm right off. Is that really true? Sophie asked. You think I is Swiss-figgling you? It is rather hard to believe. Then I is stopping right here, said the BFG sharply. I is not wishing to be called a fibster. Oh no, I'm not calling you anything, Sophie cried. I believe you. I really do. Please, please go on. The BFG gave her a long, hard stare. Sophie looked right back at him, her face open to his. I believe you, she said softly. She had offended him. She could see that. I wouldn't ever be fibbling to you, he said. I know you wouldn't, Sophie said, but you must understand that it is easy to believe such amazing things straight away. It isn't easy to believe. I understand that, the BFG said. So please forgive me and go on, she said. He waited a while longer, and then he said, okay, it is the same with the trees as it is with the flowers. If I is chopping an axe into the trunk of a big tree, I is hearing a terrible sound coming from inside the heart of the tree. What sort of sound? Sophie asked. A soft, moaning sound, the BFG said. It is like the sound an old man is making when he is dying slowly. He paused. The cave was very silent. Trees is living and growing just like you and me, he said. They is alive. So is plants. He was sitting very straight in his chair now, his hands clasped tightly together in front of him. His face was bright, his eyes round and bright as two stars. Such wonderful and terrible sounds I is hearing, he said. Some of them you would never wish to be hearing yourself, but some is like glorious music. He seemed almost to be transfigured by the excitement of his thoughts. His face was beautiful in its blaze of emotions. Tell me some more about them, Sophie said quietly. You just ought to be hearing the little mices talking, he said. Little mices is always talking to each other, and I is hearing them as loud as my own voice. What do they say? Sophie asked. Only the mices know that, he said. Spiders is also talking a great deal. You may not be thinking it, but spiders is the most tremendous natterboxes. And when they is spinning their webs, they is singing all the time. They is singing sweeter than a nightingale. Who else do you hear? Sophie asked. One of the biggest chap bags is the cattle piddlers, the BFG said. What do they say? They is arguing all the time about who's going to be the prettiest butterfly. That is all there's ever talking about. Is there a dream floating around in here now? Sophie asked. The BFG moved his great ears this way and that, listening intently. He shook his head. There is no dream in here, he said, except in the bottles. I has a special place to go for catching dreams. They is not often coming to giant country. How do you catch them? The same way you is catching butterflies, the BFG answered, with a net. He stood up and crashed over to a corner in the cave where a pole was leaning against the wall. The pole was about 30 feet long, and there was a net at the end of it. Here is the dream catcher, he said, grasping the pole in one hand. Every morning I is going out and snitching new dreams to put in my bottles. Suddenly, he seemed to lose interest in the conversation. I is getting hungry, he said. It is time for eats. And that's the end of chapter 7. So, Lots of silly language that the BFG used in these 2 chapters. So check out our assignment on Google Classroom and see if you guys can substitute the silly word for a real word that would make sense using all the clues and the sentences around it. Also, I would love for you guys to think about how Sophie and the BFG's relationship is kind of starting to grow and change, and what you think it might be turning into. In my opinion, it almost sounds like they're starting to become friends. So I wonder if you guys agree with me, and if you do, if you can try to tell me how you know, that would be great. If you guys want to have some fun and you're getting some good visualizations of any of the characters, especially those giants who were described, and you want to draw a picture, make an illustration, and then take a picture of it, I would love to see that too. All right, hope you guys had fun. See you next time. Bye.